Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Joint Society webinar on our efforts to create a new cardiovascular board of medicine. I'm Hadley Wilson, president of ACC, and I'm here today with American Heart Association President Dr. Joe Wu, Heart Rhythm Society President Dr. Jody Hurwitz, Society for Cardiovascular Angiography and Intervention President, Dr. George Dangas, and Heart Failure Society of America past President, Dr. Mark Drasner, along with our moderators, Dr. Jeffrey Kuban and Dr. Edward Fry, both of whom have been critical leaders in this effort. Over the next hour, you will hear more about this new CV board efforts and why we believe this change is necessary for both the cardiovascular profession and for the patients we all serve. We will also have time near the end for an interactive Q&A where you can ask questions of all of us. Speaking on behalf of all the societies on this call, thank you again for joining us and thank you for your time this evening. Now I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Jeff Kuban to provide us with a quick high-level overview of this new CV board effort before we move to the panel discussion. Jeff?
Thanks so much, Hadley. It's really a pleasure to be here. So the title of today's conversation is Uniting Together to Build a New Board of Cardiovascular Medicine. And I would urge everyone to go to our website, www.cvboard.org, for much more information and including the slides that we're going to present tonight. So as has been mentioned, and hopefully you have seen this, a coalition consisting of the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association, the Heart Failure Society of America, the Heart Rhythm Society, and the Society for Cardiovascular Angiography and Interventions has come together to announce the intent to submit an application to the American Board of Medical Specialties to form an American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine. So you might ask, why now? So in order to know why now, I first want to share with everybody what the present state of certification and maintenance of certification include. As you know, upon completion of cardiovascular training, fellows in training or recent graduates of fellowship programs sit for initial certification. This is an ABIM examination after passing internal medicine in first cardiovascular disease, and eventually, if they performed a fellowship in a subspecialty in interventional cardiology, electrophysiology, heart failure, and adult congenital heart disease. And hopefully upon completion and passing this initial certification, fellows indeed go on to practice and are considered board certified. The maintenance of certification pathway begins after initial certification, and there are presently 3 opportunities to maintain certification with the American Board of Internal Medicine. One is maintaining certification through a 10-year examination, and this typically is in general cardiology or your terminal specialty, including interventional, electrophysiology, heart failure, or adult congenital heart disease. There are other opportunities to maintain one's certification. About 5 years ago, the ABIM and the ACC joined forces to develop the Collaborative Maintenance Pathway, which is a 5-year plan of taking a bit of the subject, about 20% of the subject, doing practice questions, learning from these practice questions, and then taking a secure examination each year on a portion of the topics. CMP is available for cardiovascular disease or general cardiology, as well as interventional, electrophysiology, heart failure, and soon adult congenital heart disease. A few years ago, the ABIM also launched another product called the Longitudinal Knowledge Assessment, which breaks down assessment even further into smaller bits of high stakes testing questions in either general cardiology or interventional cardiology. Now, all of these maintenance of certification pathways include the necessity of passing a certification examination, which is a timed high stakes examination. So why should we consider a new board of cardiovascular medicine? Well, first of all, obviously, cardiovascular medicine has changed dramatically since cardiology became part of the ABIM in 1941, over 80 years ago. The growth and expansion within cardiovascular medicine and its subspecialties has been dramatic, especially over the past few decades. The explosion in technology, in offerings that we can provide our patients, including therapeutics, different procedures, surgeries, etc., has just exploded. There are now many specialties and subspecialties within cardiovascular medicine, and we take care of patients in every single domain, inpatient, outpatient, in the procedural areas, through multidisciplinary team-based care, really from the beginning of life until the end of life. Interestingly, as one would predict, cardiovascular service lines, cardiovascular departments are beginning to separate from departments of medicine in not only academic centers, but many practices as well. In a survey that was to ACC members last year, approximately 1/2 of cardiovascular programs in the United States have separated in some form from the Department of Medicine. So indeed, now is a unique time to develop a new cardiovascular board to service the cardiovascular professional. Why now? Well, also the American Board of Medical Specialties is taking a renewed look at the certification process, the initial certification as well as the continuous certification process, because we know that there's more to assessment of competency than taking a high stakes examination. We know this not only in medicine, we see this in our children who are taking SAT examinations, in our medical students. The whole curriculum, the whole idea of a high stakes test perhaps is not the best way to assess one's competence. The ABMS has set out new standards for the assessment of competency in initial as well as continuous certification, which go into effect in January 2024. And this is taking a much more holistic approach at the profession of cardiovascular medicine, thinking about non-clinical competencies, thinking about assessment of quality and standards, and of course, how to look at one's body of knowledge and try to fill in some knowledge gaps. So again, why now? Well, this is an opportune time to collaborate with the ABMS, which is the only universally recognized certification body in the United States, to form a new paradigm for cardiovascular professionals. In addition, cardiologists have been asking for this for many, many years, and you have voiced your opinion that MOC, especially MOC, is maybe not the greatest fit for right now for what we need for our profession. This needs to be much more focused on who we are in our practice, much more streamlined, much less punitive, and much more supportive, and certainly less costly in terms of finances as well as time. It's also important to note why now. The grandparent concept will go away in January 2024. So anyone who has been grandparented as a maintenance of certification will actually now need to participate. So we need to have much better products to bring back everyone into the maintenance or the continuous certification pathway. So I'm going to stop here and we're going to open it up for a little bit of a panel discussion. And we're going to first start off with a discussion question to Dr. Jody Hurwitz, who is the president of the Heart Rhythm Society. And Jody, I'd like to ask you a question. Obviously, the HRS has been a significant part of the discussions around this new board from the very beginning. How do you see the board easing the burden of cardiovascular professionals?
Thanks, Jeff. This has been great. It's really been wonderful to be a participant in all of this and watch this grow and succeed. So the question is a great question, and I really think that the whole idea of this is that it's going to change how we deal with continued competency for cardiology and in future communication in association with the new American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine, highlight roles that subspecialty organizations, HRS, will play in the development of personalized content, closing the individual knowledge gaps. The idea here is that we need to improve the choice, support, convenience, and credit for learning that we already do. The learning assessment that we hope to make up should continue with continued competency identifying knowledge and skill gaps, and therefore help direct all of us to learning resources and activities that will help close these gaps. We're hoping to seek partnerships with ACCME to ease the continued competency process. And again, the idea here is that everyone will be consuming different knowledge rather than the current model, which really is that everyone needs to know something about everything.
Great, thank you so much, Jody. That was really, really helpful. I'm going to share a couple more slides just to get us focused on what a new board would actually look like. And again, this is conceptual as we apply for a new board to the American Board of Medical Specialties. So a couple of ideas about concepts for a new board. Now, the ABMS will still require in its new updated guidelines initial certification, as mentioned, after fellowship training or in the subspecialty areas. But importantly, some significant changes in continuous certification, or what we used to know as MOC. And finally, we want to make sure that the diplomat experience, the experience of the cardiologist as they go through the lifelong learning paradigm, is changed and again, much more supportive. So this is the content of what we are proposing in our application to the American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine, to the ABMS. So first of all, initial certification. Well, as mentioned, the ABMS is still going to require an initial closed book timed examination for initial certification. So right off the bat, you're probably not going to see much significant changes in the general cardiology or the subspecialty evaluation for initial certification. It'll include an examination time tested based on a blueprint, although we do anticipate the societies, including the societies that are represented today and many other societies, developing the blueprint about what's important to test our trainees. There will be general as well as subspecialty examinations. The beginnings will look very similar to the 5 that we have right now, but there will be ample opportunity to develop new subspecialty examinations. And importantly, this will be seamless because this will be recognized by the ABMS, which is recognized by all the payers, by all the hospitals, by all the certification bodies that are necessary. Importantly, I think you will find in our application that the concepts of continuous certification are going to change substantially. And this has been, I think, really the crux of folks' dissatisfaction about what it does and what it takes to continue our certification as we are lifelong learners. Now, the traditional approach, which is actually embedded in the 10-year exam, the CMP, and the LKA, is to complete high-stakes questions, typically timed. You receive a score, it's either passing or failing, and it really tolerates your knowledge gaps. It doesn't go back and say, hey, let's think about what you don't know and how to fill those knowledge gaps. It either says green light or red light. The more innovative approach, which the ABMS is actually embracing, is to use tools such as questions to assess one's knowledge. We all have knowledge gaps. We typically avoid those knowledge gaps, but what if we receive a report from a bed of questions that suggested you have specific areas that need improvement? Well, then we should actually target those areas with CME activities, with communication with the societies about how to fill those knowledge gaps, allow one to get credit for doing those activities, demonstrate closure, perhaps with a new set of questions that are not time-based or high stakes, but allow one to reassess, finish that, and then move on. So this doesn't tolerate a knowledge gap, it actually addresses a knowledge gap, which I think is a much more novel approach to keeping our knowledge current and keeping us as competent clinicians. So a continuous certification pathway might look as easy as this. First of all, of course, one has to maintain good standing by the state, good standing in your place that you're working, in the practice or the hospital or the system in which you work. But importantly, there needs to be engagement in lifelong learning. As mentioned, to assess what you know, but importantly, to identify what you don't know, to fill those knowledge gaps with CME activities that are logged in a very easy technology tracking reporting system, to earn credit for that, both in the clinical as well as the non-clinical CME realm, typically linked to your knowledge gaps, move on from knowledge gap to knowledge gap and continue on the pathway of lifelong learning. And as I mentioned, the ABMS also is very interested that we are all importantly engaged in performance improvement. Now that's pretty easy in cardiology. We can't complete a day without doing something in the practice improvement realm. As long as we can attest to that, we're participating in a hospital quality initiative, we're participating in a practice initiative or NCDR or something along those lines, that should suffice that indeed we are continuing to try to improve the quality of the work we perform. This will involve constant communication between the board, which is going to be responsible for communicating with the diplomat, tracking one's performance, and reporting back and forth as to where one is over a period of time. And importantly, having close communications with societies who know what those gaps are, who have the technology and the expertise to help our diplomats fill those gaps and be supportive in the learning process. So if we are to look at the continuous certification pathway, or MOC, in a new American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine, secured time questions go away. This should be a much more supported learning environment, focusing on identifying what you know, but importantly, identifying what you don't know and developing strategies to fill those knowledge gaps, formative strategies, to allow one to understand where they are in this journey, allows for remediation, doesn't punish for remediation, will be linked to CME activities with close collaboration with cardiovascular societies, and importantly, again, under the umbrella of the ABMS and the American Medical Association. We anticipate in the MOC, or continuous certification pathway, with a new board, significant cost and time savings for the diplomat. So I'm going to stop there and we'll continue with our panel discussion.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. That was an incredible overview of a very lengthy and complicated subject, obviously. I think, as Jeff has emphasized, the take-home message is to focus on the diplomats from the standpoint of being able to establish our competence, identifying our knowledge gaps, and filling those knowledge gaps, and commitment to lifelong learning. So Hadley, in addition to these fundamental changes, what else do you see as different about this new board?
Well, thanks, Ted. And I think that Dr. Hurwitz and Dr. Kubin have touched on some of these differences for sure in their response. I also think it's important that we note that the new board, if approved, will be governed by a board of directors comprising cardiovascular professionals. These will be cardiovascular professionals, not just general internists and others across the medicine field, but those that are really dedicated to cardiovascular and who are representatives of clinical expertise for the various cardiovascular certifications that will be offered. More specific details will be forthcoming over the next few months as this becomes developed. Additionally, there will be new certifications that will be designed specifically with cardiovascular professionals in mind, meaning that the requirements will prioritize convenience, choice, and credit for learning. Pricing is going to be determined once the new board application has been accepted, but as Jeff has pointed out, it is our goal that the price will be lower than what physicians are currently paying, significantly lower, and the value will be exponentially greater. So lastly, I guess I would summarize to say I want to talk about the importance of transparency with this new board across all of the practices and to really the entire profession.
Great, thanks. I think those are important distinctions. Mark, if and when the new board is approved, will cardiologists have a choice as to moving to the new board or staying with ABIM? How will that work?
Well, thank you, Ed. And first of all, on behalf of the HFSA, we're absolutely delighted to participate in this effort. It's great to see all the societies coming together, and if you will, the House of Cardiology all joined at the hip on this effort. This is an important question and something that I get asked oftenly, and there is some confusion about that. The parent organization, if you will, the ABMS, mandates that there's only one board available for certification of any specialty. So if the Board of Cardiovascular Medicine comes to fruition, then all cardiologists and all the subspecialists would have to go through that new board and no longer go through the ABIM. Of course, until that's approved, we want you to continue doing what you're doing. But if the new board is approved, then whether you're general cardiologist, interventional, EP, ACHD, or heart failure, you would go through the new board.
Great, thanks, Mark. And you touched upon the fact that there are obviously multiple certificates that currently diplomates get certified in. George, talk a little bit more about these certifications. Will the new board offer different certifications in related areas of cardiology? And what about needing to obtain initial internal medicine certification?
I thank you. This is a very important and interesting question, and actually has come already, as I see on the far side of the chat, quite a bit. Many are asking about that. Would like first of all to generally say that the initial certification for internal medicine remains with the ABIM, and any changes on whether this is required or not in the future belong to the future. Whoever has ongoing certifications, etc., there will be a lot of, I would say, transitional planning. So it's not going to be a duplication. The main goal here is to avoid the duplication and enhance the efficiencies. There's nothing final, by the way, final. A lot of people are asking questions very pointed. Nothing final to the finest detail for everybody's pathway. It is for the general purpose of information of everyone that we're doing this webinar, and we invite comments on what to do and which pathways to respect and which specific items our members would like to see respected due to particular practices they follow. It is our goal in general to allow people to recertify in the areas in which they're active and their practice, not study unrelated material for the sake of an isolated exam somewhere in the hyperspace. So help us all understand this need. And if in the future additional certifications are sought, then this board can also grant these wishes. An example for that we actually in the Society of Cardiovascular Geography and Interventions, we've been discussing very actively in the last few years, whether should there be or not an additional fellowship proposal for structural interventional cardiology. Should there be additional exam later on? Who knows right now, but we're considering that. And maybe this may come about. Maybe there's a fellowship. Actually, the many members were asking for a special recognized fellowship. Will that need a further exam later? Perhaps it might. Should we offer, I don't know, something like electrocardiography for the anesthesiologist, for example? I don't know. That may be an option as well. Who knows? Should perhaps cardiac CT be a special certification? That will be under evaluation. It is not a given that we're trying to bombard anyone with multiple examinations at the same time. I think we'll be very receptive in a way to centralize and unify, consolidate existing examinations and future plans of the expansion of the scope and practices that we follow, and just mimic those practices, nothing more and nothing less, in this sort of cardiovascular board that would only care about cardiovascular practices, and it's all encompassing of all the societies that are professionally active in this discipline of medicine.
Thanks, George. I think you said it really beautifully. This is the beginning. This is going to be a very iterative process. This is an application to form a new board. But think about the opportunities, as you mentioned, some of them, the opportunities that lie ahead of us with close collaboration with the societies that are represented today and all of the societies across the House of Cardiology. The opportunities are really endless, but I think what we're trying to say is it's time for cardiology to separate from medicine. It's just the natural evolution. So let's think about this as a beginning, certainly not an end. So Joe, let's move to you. The AHA recently voted last month to join this effort. How would you see this new board benefiting patients and the public?
Yeah, so thank you, Jeff. I think a lot has been said by the other panelists about why this change is needed for cardiologists. But I also want to emphasize that our primary goal as physicians and also members of the House of Cardiology is really to improve the care and outcomes of our patients. And I think as the volunteer president for the AHA, I can personally attest to this commitment. I think as many of you know, the AHA's stated mission is to be a relentless force for a world of longer, healthier lives, right? And hope and health for everyone, everywhere. So this message is especially important for our patients who rely on us as their physicians. Now, I've been looking at the questions in the chat box by the attendees, and I do believe that at this moment, I think there are still many details that need to be worked out and finalized by the new board. But we at the AHA are very excited that if approved, we think this new ABCVM will help ensure that the cardiovascular professionals maintain the required expertise and the necessary expertise to consistently deliver optimal care to our patients. I also want to emphasize that for our field, as you all know, cardiovascular medicine is a very dynamic field. It's continuously evolving as a specialty, and I think that the recertification board backed by this House of Cardiology will ultimately be the best interest, not just for us, but also for our patients. Now, lastly, if I may, one last comment I would like to say is that, this new board will reside under the umbrella of the ABMS, which, we believe is the only authority widely recognized by the public, by the regulators, and by the payers for initial as well as ongoing recertification in the U.S. And I think that building upon this existing trust is the best way that we at the AHA believe to ensure that the patients and caregivers have confidence with us when seeking medical advice and making healthcare decisions. Yeah. But thank you for all the efforts that we are doing as a collective, a group. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Joe. And I'm just going to share just a few more slides to conclude the formal portion, then we'd like to get to the questions. So I'd like to pay attention to the website. Please go to cvboard.org. You will see all sorts of information, including frequently asked questions, including some of the questions you're going to ask tonight. We're going to continue to upload answers to those questions. You can see Dr. Wilson's Heart to Heart that was published about a month ago, and other interesting areas that will help continue to educate folks about this new concept of a new cardiovascular board. Today's slides will also be available to you. So we encourage you to go to cvboard.org. And just to sort of take home a couple of key points. So I think based on what you have shared with your societies, cardiology has been waiting for this for a very long time, and now is the right time to consider this, along with the ABMS, to really think about the next generation of making sure that our diplomats are competent and learning and ensuring competent care to the public. We all owe it to our patients. This will be an entirely independent board. This will not be a society board. This will be an independent board. It will be governed by cardiologists and professionals who know about cardiology, who know about education, who know about lifelong learning. We anticipate, if approved, seamless transition from cardiovascular and its subspecialties under the ABIM to a separate board, the American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine, under the ABMS. So there should be seamless transition. If you're maintaining your certification, there should be seamless transition. You won't have to sit for a new exam to become a new member of this board. We are strongly making sure that this is less burdensome, less costly, more supportive, not punitive, and much more along the lines of what we are doing in our clinical practice. As we have mentioned, this is an iterative process. This looks very different than the way we designed it 2 years ago. And as we continue to work with the ABMS and our society partners to iterate this process, we have to start somewhere. So we are starting with the initial certification in those 5 areas of general cardiology and the 4 subspecialties, likely more to come, and many, many changes to the continuous certification pathway. Importantly, this allows us, cardiologists and our societies, to think innovatively. And by the way, not just about certification and continuous certification, but about training paradigms and about conclusion of our careers and new pathways for many, many different areas of certification. Importantly, we are really at the beginning of this process with an application going into the ABMS, but it's going to take some time. The ABMS has to think about this, adjudicate this, go through their process, which could take up to a year. And then we actually have to stand up the new board with all the bells and whistles, including initial certification examinations and continuous certification pathways. So for right now, don't change your practice of continuous certification, or if you're a fellow, you will likely have to take a certifying examination from the ABIM within the next year or so. But hopefully in the year 2025, at some point, we will be able to stand up a new cardiovascular medicine board. So again, stay tuned. We will put all this information on the website and continue to update the website so everybody is informed on a timely basis.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. And also thank you to all of our panelists, Dr. Dangus, Dr. Drosner, Dr. Hurwitz, and Dr. Wu, and also Dr. Hadley Wilson. Before we hand things over back to Dr. Wilson for the Q&A session, I think it's important to follow up and reemphasize a couple points that Jeff and Joe made towards the end, and that is, what is the timeline? So as Jeff just stated, this is a iterative process. We are at the application phase. We are working closely with ABMS as they formalize the updates of their submission process. And as those come together, we anticipate that it'll be about an 8 to 12 month period of review by ABMS in conjunction with AMA. And once there is approval, which we have great confidence about, there will obviously be a time required for operationalizing and implementing the new board. So there will be a period of time. It is our hope that the new board is stood up in 2025. So during that period of time, and as Jeff said at the very beginning of his presentation, there is a big change that takes place January of 2024, which is that those diplomates who had been certified prior to 1990, the so-called grandparents, will now have to participate in maintenance of certification in order to have that moniker. And so if you are already engaged in maintenance of certification, keep doing what you're doing until the new board launches. So that may be participating in the collaborative maintenance pathway, or CMP, or the longitudinal knowledge assessment through ABIM, the LKA, or the 10-year exam. But those will be necessary to continue on. But as the new board is launched and becomes operational, then obviously these requirements will all go away and will change. So with that, I'm going to turn things back to Hadley Wilson, and we can start some questions and answers. So thank you for your time and attention, and thank you again to all the panelists for your expertise and insights.
Thanks, Ed, and thanks to all of our panelists. You know, we are really just a little more than half over, so we have plenty of time for questions, and I've seen 50 to 100 questions that have gone through the screen, and we are really trying to capture all those questions and answer those questions. Some of those we'll answer live here now, and some the others, we hope that if they're not answered, we will have those captured and we will get back with a response to you as well. But you know, there've been some really great questions that have come up. One of the questions that may have already been addressed, but I'm going to turn it over to ask Dr. Dangus. In this new scenario, and Jeff addressed this in his presentation, how will that be different in terms of testing, in terms of going on your home computer, and you know, how will that be different in terms of time testing and the ability to make up for those questions that you don't get right, your knowledge gaps?
Well, again, first of all, let me assure everyone that specific, extremely accurate answers to any of the subjects discussed today, this moment doesn't exist. It's an evolving process, and our thought process behind this particular aspect that Hadley asked me is that a knowledge-based open book environment would be very, very appropriate, which is very similar what is done in many other specialties anyhow. And in general, whatever is done and working in several other areas of also participate under the ABMS umbrella, we see why not that might not be operational with us. On another note, we also aim to reduce and to take steps towards against any duplication of efforts. And other things that we participate or may participate will be examined. And we see how we could offer possibilities for utilizing those activities as much as possible and as appropriate as possible towards the certification process if they are meritorious and they documented educational or documented educational value. And again, let me repeat something I also said earlier, and particularly the members of SCA and I will receive, and in response or in conjunction with this webinar, a time period of a few weeks to send us suggestions, ideas regarding this board that we need to take under account. And I'm sure the same holds true for everyone. That's why for every society members, and we hear that from the presidents, of course, but the idea that we're going to be responding to the questions through the webinar all along, I just is meant to vet out any anxiety, because I do sense a lot of anxiety in reading the chat. People are asking particular question about their own scenarios as if we have immediate answers, somehow potentially excluding them or something bad happening to them. The general idea is I want to have a lot of transition with existing plans. We're not going to leave any diplomat behind. There will be transition plans for everyone in this, not to worry about the specific questions we hear.
If I might, the question is, are we going to need to use time-based, secure, high-stakes questions to assess one's medical competency? And I think that's what we're trying to get away from. As physicians, we have been taking tests our whole lives. And tests are actually a pretty good way to figure out if you know a body of knowledge or if you don't know. But what we're trying to do is change the concept here. Perhaps using questions is one way of assessing where your knowledge gaps are. But importantly, then helping the clinician, not harming the clinician, but helping the clinician fill those gaps, saying, okay, now do you understand the concept with maybe some more questions or other ways to assess it, getting credit while you're doing this, and then finally moving on to the next topic. This is a much more supportive learning environment that I think we would all embrace, because we all need to continue to assess what we know and what we don't know.
Very good. So Jody, I'm going to ask you this question, which is for electrophysiologists, how do you see this in terms of them going from their initial cardiovascular board to their subspecialty in electrophysiology?
That's a great question, and actually relates to a lot of the questions. I think we're all reading a lot of the questions in the chat going, oh, we can answer this, we can answer that. And I think, again, I think Jeff showed some very good information at the beginning. I do think that, like it or not, we're all going to have to accept that when we first certify in cardiology or in the subspecialties, that there will be a specific exam associated with this. But what we're really working at is the continued competency and how we continue to learn. And I see that there was a question in the chat of, is the fact that I just took a 10-year certifying exam, does this mean that I'm out of luck? Quite the contrary. The whole idea is, and right now ABIM mandates that you continue this maintenance of certification, even though you've taken these 10-year exams. And again, as I stress, the whole point is not for all of us to know everything. It's to know what's important specifically with what we do each day. And I can just tell you from electrophysiology, not all electrophysiologists do the same thing. Some are more placing devices, some are more in terms of ablation. And the point is to help all of us figure out what we need to know specifically to help in our practice and to help with our patient care. And that's the whole idea behind all of this, and which makes it really, truly exciting and more educational.
We can't hear you, Hadley.
Sorry, I'm trying to be observant of muting and unmuting. Dr. Wu, could you tell us a little bit more about the excitement from your board and also what we felt this weekend at the American Heart Association?
Well, I think our board is very excited to partner with everybody in this group. And as I mentioned earlier, that I think this is best for our physicians and also best for our patients. And for me personally, I do have to renew my boards next year, and with some trepidation given all these changes. But I want to echo the comment made earlier by Dr. Josh Kwasna, which I saw in the chat box. And I think the best exam is really to make it friendly so that we do the questions. And if we miss the questions, the exam provides us with some answers and also explain why we missed it so that we get educated at the same time, redo the question, done, and move on to the next question. And that becomes much more fun rather than going in with fear and trepidation. I think with regard to your second question, with the AHA, we had a great meeting. We had many attendees and we had exciting 3-day meeting with late breaking science. Select was a big hit. And we also have many other late breaking science research. And I do think that our attendees walk out of the room feeling well, energized, and looking forward to reinvigorate themselves in their clinical practice and then also in their population translational basic research and work together all as a team. Yeah.
Thank you. And Mark, Dr. Drasner. So the Heart Failure Society meeting also occurred recently, and I know that you expressed some positive responses, particularly for your subspecialty.
Yes, and in fact, in the heart failure community, one of the very hot topics is the subspecialty training and the fellowship. And I think that's a good example here where this new American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine is going to give us an opportunity potentially to redesign that training. And I too, as I look at the chat, there is a lot of trepidation and in some ways, perhaps a lack of trust in the current system with the ABIM. And that's going to be one of the advantages of the new board is that it's going to be comprised of cardiologists who are going to be committed to listening to their participants, the stakeholders, and making sure that the educational products offered are in their benefit and are useful in their practice. So I think this is I know that there's fear out there. I can feel that in the chat, but this really is a great opportunity for us that we're going to have a board of cardiologists dedicated specifically to our needs. And so it's a real great opportunity, not just in the heart failure community, but I think all of cardiology.
And we're seeing, discussion from a lot of the subspecialty societies here as well. And actually, I'm going to turn this back over to Ed and ask, how will the general cardiologist feel with this new American Board of Cardiovascular Medicine? We're talking a lot about the subspecialty groups within it, but how about general cardiologists, or how about interventional cardiologists that want to drop back to general cardiology like you and me?
Yeah, exactly. So I think just as has been stated about the subspecialty cardiologists, the general cardiologists will accrue the same advantages, which is to learn what they don't know, understand those knowledge gaps, be given the direction and the tools to fill those knowledge gaps, and stay up to date and benefit their patients. You touched on one specific, which is very very pertinent to both you and I, and maybe one day George, when he actually stops doing procedures. That may be never, but and actually I have a very personal experience here. I actually came out of the cath lab 4 years ago, and when I no longer was doing the requisite number of cases to take the interventional boards, I could no longer recertify in my terminal training board, interventional cardiology. So I had to go back and now become continue to have continuous certification within general cardiology, and that's timing was fortunate, however, because I just joined the CMP, the collaborative maintenance pathway, and that filled that gap. But this is going to become a growing problem, as we know that interventional cardiologists are actually the oldest subspecialty group within cardiology, and there will be more and more who are coming out of doing procedures and will need a home. And we can see that there will be now a path and a mechanism to be able to accommodate that. So again, I think the timing of this, as our physician community ages, will fill that gap nicely.
Thanks, Ed. And Jeff, I'm going to ask you a question. Several that have been coming across the chat have been saying, what do you think the likelihood of the ABMS accepting this application and of this passing? I mean, certainly, you know, we see us meeting at night and webinars and so forth. So we definitely have enthusiasm on our side. But you and Ed and Janice and others have been really, along with this joint coalition of society members, have been talking to ABMS. What is your thoughts on the likelihood of this passing?
Great question. And I don't have a crystal ball, but I'm very cautiously optimistic that we will indeed get approval. And the reason I'm optimistic is because I think the ABMS2 is trying to figure out the next generation of how we assess competency, especially in the lifelong learning paradigm. Our job is to make the case to the ABMS that we have support from the cardiology community. And what you see in front of you is support from the cardiology community, from the House of Cardiology. And it's also represented by many other societies that are not on this screen right now. So we have that support. I think we have some great ideas that we have been working with the ABMS. They're very interested in new ways of assessing competency, in taking away this burden, in reducing the cost, in making it a more supportive environment that I think are really in lockstep with their new standards that go forth in 2024. And I think there's full recognition across the House of Medicine that cardiology indeed has distinguished itself as a separate field, separate from internal medicine. It doesn't mean that we don't value our internal medicine training and our internal medicine certification. It doesn't mean that. But it means that we have built a specialty that now is a standalone specialty with many, many subspecialties. And we owe it to that specialty to govern it, to make sure that we are focused on what diplomats need, and to make sure that our patients are getting competent, good care.
Thanks. And one of the questions, or it's coming up several times, again, you know, we have these subspecialties up here, but one of the largest subspecialties in cardiology is the ASC, the American Society of Echocardiography. And so that begets the question, how do the imaging societies potentially participate in this, and what could be the future for them? And I'll turn that over to Ed and ask him if he might just talk about the possibilities of some of these different societies that aren't necessarily represented here on the screen, like echo and imaging societies.
Yeah, it's a great question, and obviously it begs the question, why just addressing these 5 certificates right now? Well, these are the 5 certificates that currently are offered through ABIM, And as we stand up the board, we obviously have to take care of continuing those certificates. And right now, there is not a separate certificate within the ABIM process related to imaging or advanced imaging. The structure, both from a governance standpoint and an operational standpoint that's projected from this project, would be to create a venue and a vehicle for those other societies to be engaged through representation, and also very likely through the development of new certifications. We've had direct discussions with ASE and with SCCT and SCMR and the other imaging subspecialty groups and ASNEC. And right now they don't have an audience. They don't have a way, they don't have a place at the table in the ABIM process, given the lack of the certificates. So we hope that that's something that will change and evolve quickly as the new board is stood up, and we have the input of those voices and the ability to build new certificates as we go forward.
Thanks. And before I turn it back to our group, Jeff, I'll ask you one more. There's repetitive questions about the cost. You actually addressed it in your slide presentation, but not only about the cost, but the convenience of testing or certifying and so forth, and how that might be done, and how that can be different than the old paradigm.
Right, so let's break the cost down in two areas. One is the initial certification, the other is the continuous certification. So for initial certification, we will need to build new examinations. That will, for the fellows in training or those that are graduating, that will cost, that will have a specific cost associated with it. So it's hard to estimate. We certainly don't think it's going to be any more costly right off the bat, but hopefully as time goes on, we can continue to focus on cost for initial certification. For continuous certification, we anticipate significant cost savings. And this is because a lot of the technology, a lot of the materials are already out there. We need to make sure that there is a technology that is focused on the diplomat that will be able to log what we do in CME, make it easy and seamless. We don't need to incorporate too many people here. We just need to incorporate really good technology. So when we've done pro forma, thinking about how much would it cost on an annual basis, we're estimating around a 40% or so cost reduction annually to keep our continuous certification. But to put up a new board will take some money. There will be initial cost from the societies to stand up a new professional board, which is independent and has its own governance. But the societies are willing to do this because of the important nature of what we're trying to do. In terms of convenience, right now, any of these three pathways, these are timed tests. You have to take it during a certain window. It's expected that these are secure tests, but that puts a lot of pressure and inconvenience on those who are participating in this. We anticipate a totally different environment where at your leisure, you can say, I want to take a couple of practice questions or questions just to assess my knowledge. Oh, I got one wrong. Tomorrow or the next day, I'm going to follow the guidelines and see what CME activities would be relevant to close my knowledge gaps. And then 3 weeks later, I might reassess my knowledge in this area. And then a month later, I might go to something else. As long as there is a continuation of engagement and lifelong learning, this should suffice. We need to make sure that there are certain guardrails and not leave it totally up to the diplomat. So there will be certain pathways or paradigms that one will have to adhere to. But this will be much more convenient and much less burdensome to the busy lives that we are all practicing.
Thanks, that's great. And I really appreciate that you talked about the convenience of this continuous learning, and that this can be done individually and done in your practice without being disrupted and having to go to board review courses elsewhere and testing centers and so forth. So that's really terrific. And actually, we've had a lot of positive comments, as you all have seen in the chat. And many are saying, what can we do to help move this board forward? So we really appreciate all the support, because it is all of us in the House of Cardiology. We only have a few minutes left, so I'm going to ask each of our panelists here if they want to give like a 1-minute closing response for our webinar. So just looking at the panel, Mark, I'm going to start with you from Heart Failure Society of America.
Yeah, thank you again. I think this is a great opportunity for the entire House of Cardiology to come together on this initiative. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to improve the way we assess competency moving forward. I like the line I saw in the chat that this is a board of cardiologists for cardiologists. And I think that's going to be fantastic. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And Jody, if you'll give a 1-minute final closing statement.
Thank you. There have been some fantastic questions. I want to reiterate that the members, and as I think Mark said, that the members on the board are going to be representative of all of these different societies that are here now, and that the specifics for competency are really going. The idea is that each of the specific societies who knows what their diplomats, their candidates, whatever, they know what that they need to know the best. So those are really where a lot of this knowledge is information is going to be coming from. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Thank you, Jody. And George, final words.
I certainly echo the previous two, and this has been a great and very informative webinar. I like very much the activity and the spirit of the chat. What can people do? Can do many things. They can participate in this period of by sending us their suggestion about what they feel should be done about their own situation or in general. We need to know as many specific pathways, options as possible. This process is not supposed to be monolithic, top down. This is supposed to be modular or responsive to the different ways people practice cardiology these days, not in the last century, and enable everyone to recertify in their own way they practice and they see useful for their practice.
Thanks, George. And Joe, would you like to give us a closing statement?
Yeah, so I think as I stated before, this is a great path forward for cardiologists and also for patients. And I must admit, at the very beginning, I was confused with all the different organizations. But as I looked more into it, at the end of the day, it's almost akin to academic medicine, meaning that ABMS is the dean of the School of Medicine, ABIM is the Department of Medicine chair. We cardiologists want to pull out a Department of Medicine. And so I think we just have to nurture our relationship with the ABMS. And I think the people who talk about how they can help, perhaps sending personal letters or to some type of ABMS, which is the thing, saying that why this is important for us to move forward will help drive our mission. Yeah.
Thanks, Joe. I love that analogy. That's really good. Ed, you have maybe 30 seconds.
Well, just to follow up to Joe's comment, there actually will be a public comment period, and that will be the perfect time for people to engage in terms of support and showing their participation in this. I'll just go back to end up just to say what Mark alluded to earlier, which was that this is an organization for cardiologists by cardiologists at a time when cardiology has matured into its own specialty.
Thanks, Ed. Great parting words. Jeff, I want to let you weigh in here because you've given us really some great information all along the way. We really appreciate all the work you've done with your team as well. So any last sound bites from you?
Thanks, Hadley. And this has really been a terrific hour. I'll just end by what I said at the beginning. I really think now is the time. It's the right time for cardiology. It's the right time to partner with the ABMS. The voice of cardiology is very loud and very strong, and we hear you. And we are here to support the cardiologists in this journey. So let's do this together. I think you see representation of the House of Cardiology on the screen, and it's out there in its entirety. Let's show the ABMS that we can be a good partner. I know we can. and we can really improve this really critical thing called lifelong learning. We are all on this journey together. We owe it to our patients, we owe it to the public, and we owe it to ourselves to have appropriate measures of competency. And I think we're well on our way.
I don't think it could have been said any better. And I would just like to say to all of you, thanks for all of my society colleagues. Thanks to all of you that have participated, all of our society colleagues. We're all in the House of Cardiology together. And this information, this recording will be on cvboard.org, as well as fact sheets, other information, videos. We hope that as it goes along, we'll have more updating webinars as well. So we really appreciate everybody participating, and we look forward to this application process continuing as strongly as it has. Thanks, everyone. What a great collaborative effort. Have a good evening.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
all.